The market is a powerful force, and the market does one thing. When there's something that's valuable, it produces many companies that serve that
Right.
purpose, and they compete to push prices down.
It just hasn't happened yet in the history of Nvidia. They like keep pushing the envelope. They're always
Wes,
ahead.
let me
I
ask you
just
this.
don't see any
On
reason why that's going to change.
AI specific training and inference chips like H100, is the gap between Nvidia and the second place getting bigger or smaller today?
TPUs were better for about 2 years, and now NVIDIA GPUs are now better again. So they've again taken back the reins. So everything that kind of Google gained with that, I'm not saying has been lost, but as far as cloud goes, like Google selling those services to other companies, not so much
Interesting.
anymore. It's back to GPUs.
Meta and then Omar.
I would say that's not correct. Two things. One, the Trip chip replaced NVIDIA chips in the vehicle already in Teslas. So there are examples where NVIDIA basically is not competing as efficiently as it used to once before in the AI domain. And the second thing is, if you look at TPU5 paper, they're already doing cross data center work. And like Omar was saying, if you can find ways to scale down the needs, and mixture of experts has become like the way that everybody's doing it, then you remove this blunt force, everything's a nail hammer approach of just throw more and more data at it. That is not the way things are going. And even if you wanted to go that way, it seems like the models today are already trained with all the data they could get their hands on. So you may not even have more data to throw at it, which then suggests we're already at peak computational capacity.
So I think the lead is actually narrowing, not getting bigger. TPUs are great, but since really AlexNet to today, NVIDIA has been the dominant way to train models. And I think that, NVIDIA has dominated really since their birth. But the history of other microprocessor technologies, I think, are instructive of what we can expect in the future for graphics and AI compute. The great Jim Keller from AMD and Apple, he worked on some of the Apple silicon processors. He worked at AMD. He said, "CUDA's not a moat, it's a swamp. x86 was a swamp too." And if you remember in the early days, Intel, it was like, oh my God, who can touch Intel? They're the greatest chip company in the world. And they've got x86, and Windows only runs on x86. So, of course, everyone's going to be buying their chips because that's what runs Windows and that's what runs all this IBM PC software. And for a while, they were just this amazing company. But then AMD came. At first, they put out a chip that was compatible, that ran the same instruction set, that was cheaper. Over time, AMD
Right.
actually started putting out better chips than Intel.
Right.
That could happen to NVIDIA too.
Right. Wes,
So I love Jim. Like he's amazing, but he's incredibly biased because he's now the CEO of TensTorrent, which is ultimately competing with CUDA. So for him to say that is it's an incredibly biased statement. And while it may be correct, it may be not. That's for everybody to decide. But at the end, CUDA is still like decades now. Like before it was CUDA, like it was still being used to develop on top of NVIDIA hardware. And just to be very clear, like TPUs are still great, but it's taken 8 years now for them to basically barely be able to kind of be used cross data center. Like it just takes an incredibly long time, and NVIDIA continues to lead. That's the part that they're really good at. That's my bold statement.
Can I make a bear statement?
sure.
I think there are three major headwinds that have not been addressed by the bulls, and those are one, computational approaches in terms of software can drastically reduce the need for the chips to achieve the same level of output. So if the demand drops for training foundational models, fine tuning, or even inference serving, that's one big factor. Two, we've seen things like Grok with a Q come out where there's different approaches that are completely different from even traditional ASICs that make it even more efficient to serve tensors. So that could also disrupt the market, where a different hardware approach that NVIDIA doesn't have domain expertise on could disrupt them. And then the third one is the shifting nature of demand, where lots of people are playing with these LLMs today, but it turns out probably most of the things you need are going to be sufficient in small models, and most of the interactions are going to be through phones and iPhones and Pixels and Samsung phones. They all have tensor processors built in now. So we could see a huge shift from cloud to client.
Wes,
Like I get the 3 points. I'll address them. So like the first one, the computational nature of being, software can handle part of that. Like I'm all for modular AI and for making it more unified and for software to be easier to write so it can be more like spread across different types of hardware. That's great. And I'm all in favor of Chris pursuing that, and I wish him the best. And then that it just takes an incredible amount of time to do that. Like he's 3 to 5 years away from like massive production, I think. And then Grok with Q, my predecessor on TPUs, he went over there before I took over. He went over there to start up Grok, and that was in 2016. So it just takes an incredibly long time. And we could definitely have a solution that handles distributing the workload. But unfortunately, like the interconnectivity of the chips are what makes them super fast. So that interconnectivity just isn't there. We're talking like, picoseconds. We're not talking milliseconds.
Regarding the cloud to client, I'm referring to the fact that those workloads that required large interconnectivity in the cloud for inference might just move to the device and not need to go to the cloud at all. Think of like voice recognition as an example. A long time ago, you had to always go to servers, and now you can just do it on device. Similar
yeah,
things are going to happen to a lot of
makes
things.
sense. Um, Before you and Wes have to go, I want to get one statement from you. While Omar talks, you guys can think about the answer to this following question. What would change your mind? Seeing what would change your mind from bull to bear, bear to bull? Omar, go ahead.
So I think my answer to Meta's points is these things are not happening. Where is the evidence of a great breakthrough that reduces our need for compute? It's nowhere. Show me a paper and then maybe I'll reconsider it, but I haven't heard of anything that would make any of these things happen in a material level. The move from cloud to compute, I mean to mobile, cloud isn't going anywhere anytime soon. I'm not saying it can't happen long term, but these things simply just aren't happening today.
I'll send you some papers. I love sending
No,
papers.
you're done. The only thing I want from you is your answer to what would change your mind. Do you want to go first or Wes first?
Let's let Wes go first.
Wes?
The thing that would change my mind, and Meta can send out a paper because that would essentially change my mind if there was a new model type or a new way that like drastically reduced the amount of compute. And I know that like Hugging Face has one, and the name escapes me, but that would be one thing that could potentially change my mind. Realize that that really hasn't happened since 2017, the original transformer model. So there's that. And then the other kind of major thing is if we solve a large part of AGI, like in solved means like it's in production, people are using it and they're getting great value out of it. It's not ChatGPT. Like that's not what I'm talking about. That is not AGI in any way, shape, or form. Like we can say that but that would be the other, just to keep this short, that would be the other thing that would sway because then we could potentially see a cap in demand.
You had asked what would change my mind.
Yeah.
If NVIDIA, as they are now approaching setting up data centers for rental only, if they manage to get a good software API cloud system up and running, like AWS, and they serve more than just AI over time, but at least they start serving and becoming a cloud provider, that would change my mind, because then they'd be vertically integrated and they could grab the margins from the other side. And the other thing that would change my mind is if the Ethereum crypto boom or something along those lines comes along and finds a way to make use of the idle GPUs.